Okay, there we go. Welcome to week 4, Paul, Marietta, Susan. Blessing to be on week 4, and I saw that the outlines were turned in for James, so I was able to grade. If it was turned in my Sunday, I was able to grade it. If not, then I'll still need to grade it. But what I did see, I really liked. And the next assignment is going to be word studies. And so before I share the screen, why don't I just talk a little bit about the word studies? So it'll be on the recording here, and just kind of reiterate what's being required. So for the word studies, it'll be the word wisdom. I'm looking for at least three full pages on this. I mean, definitely more. You guys have been going above and beyond on volume, which is great. So definitely you can err on the side of more in is good. I'd like to see multiple sources quoted, both the Hebrew definition of wisdom and then also the Greek definition of wisdom for the New Testament. And then after you do the Hebrew definition in the Old Testament, give Old Testament examples, cite several books of how wisdom is used, some different examples, different verses, talk about how it was used. Because we know that James quotes several Old Testament characters, so he leverages the Old Testament and quite a bit. And then also for the New Testament, talk about how it's being used in both the Gospels, how it's being used by Paul, and then you can finish the word study by talking about how James is using that word. So some of the books that are helpful, I'll just grab off my shelf, and I think I did show you guys already. Get the Greek and the Hebrew. All right, here's a couple of good books. For the Greek, it's going to be Silva does this one, and it is the New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology and Exegesis, and it's a it's a 5-volume set. And so it has tons of detail here in the Greek. I mean, if you have this, you are really set on the Greek. There is a lot, very exhaustive, excellent.
So does that book, it basically gives you the definition in English and in Greek? Is that how it works?
It's only talking about the Greek. It's only talking about the Greek. Yeah,
okay.
That's all we're caring about is the Greek. And then it gives examples from classical literature as well. So there's examples from classical time periods in there. And then when you go into this one is not as much volume, but it's still like if I look at this word, you'll have at least a page, half a page, sometimes more. And this is we call it TWOT, the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. It's a 2-volume set. It's a 2-volume set. So there's TWOT and TWOD, the Theological Word Book of the Old, TWOT. Well, there's another one too. But anyway, this is a good one. Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. Let me see if the reference on that other Hebrew one that's referenced quite a bit. Let's see here. Give me just one moment. I'm pulling out one of the sources here. Acronyms. Oh, I actually got it. That's right. I got it in the front. TDOT. Let me just go ahead and give you the acronym on that one. TDOT. Abbreviations. The Theological Dictionary. Yep, I was saying dictionary at the end. The Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament. That's TDOT. So that's the other good one if you're going to make it to a Christian library. TDOT.
Can you show the book?
Theological. No, I'm just giving you the reference because I don't have the book with me. I used it. I actually have that one. Just raise the little hand when you're gonna ask the question. I actually have that one through my online, or excuse me, through my software. There's Logos and then other software. So I actually have that one through my software. So I just use my computer to get that one. But Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament is the other one. And and let me just double check here as I open up the. Okay, this is our week 4. I just want to. I'm looking at the assignment as listed in our syllabus just to make sure I'm not missing anything on it. Okay, word study on wisdom. What is wisdom? Look up the word wisdom in at least 3 dictionaries and or encyclopedias. Read what is said about the word. Yep, type the summary. Explain what the word means in the book of James. And I also want to know what it means in different contexts of the Old Testament and the New Testament. And 100 points. And that'll be the assignment for the week. All right. Any final questions on that one? And you can email me if you're not finding sources or you have an additional question, or you could think of one during the class. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share and we'll get started. I wanted to talk about some distinctives of dispensationalism and why literal interpretation is so important. Then we're going to have a bunch of pictures as we get into this lecture. We're going to talk about historical context and everything. It won't just be, a lot of text on slides. So that'll be good. So let me go ahead and share my screen and hopefully, all right, you guys are seeing this good. So Dr. Gromacki shared this when he did a Bible prophecy presentation on Daniel recently in Calvary, and you could go into YouTube and Calvary University and find that. It's excellent, by the way. A review of the 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel. And he put this slide up here, and so I wanted to use this again. Dr. Gary Gromacki did this slide. I just added some notes around it. Distinctives of dispensationalism. So in contrast to dispensationalism, you would have, for example, amillennialism, which would say that there's no millennium. You would also have ideas such as replacement theology. Maybe you've heard of replacement theology. Replacement theology would say, once the New Testament happens, that the believers not just are a part of the family of God and children of Abraham, but the believers completely replaced Israel, and that there's no promises to Israel whatsoever. And that leads to a lot of other issues. And so when you think about dispensationalism, it starts, and this is why this class is so important, and it's very early when we're doing our seminary training, a literal interpretation of the Bible. That's where you have to begin. And we do have, typology, we have different genres. We understand that there's poetic literature, that there's apocalyptic literature. But key here is that there's a distinction between Israel and the church. Now, you do have converted Jews in Christianity that are Messianic Jews. That's absolutely true. However, God gave specific promises to the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We could go to Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3, talking about giving them the land, talking about being a blessing, establishing a nation. Then you can go to Jeremiah 30. You can go to so many different places in the Old Testament that talk about Israel being restored back to the land after being driven from the land. Then all of these promises until ultimately we have in Romans chapter 11 at the end, the conversion of Israel. So the distinction between Israel and the church. So literal interpretation, prophecy, you can say prophecy is history told in advance. We believe in a prophetic God. He knows the future in advance. And fulfilled prophecy is a strong evidence for the inspiration of the Bible. Micah 5:2 saying that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, and that's exactly what happened. So the place of his birth and also the manner of his death, all of these things are talked about, details in Isaiah 53. So these are very strong evidences for the inspiration of the Bible. And then I point to, for example, in my dissertation, the Dead Sea Scrolls. We know that Isaiah predates Jesus, and we have the Dead Sea Scrolls as proof because even Jewish scholars have said these writings of Isaiah predate the New Testament era by hundreds of years, The contrast to this would be replacement theology. It can lead to even anti-Semitism. There's a lot of dangerous things that come once they begin blaming the Jews. Oh, they have nothing to do with the land. They're completely separate. A lot of dangerous thinking can happen out of that replacement theology. So we are not replacement theology at Calvary. We're dispensational. And so if you believe in a millennium, literal interpretation of the Bible, then this is dispensationalism. The pre-tribulation rapture of the church is taught at Calvary, so the rapture is very important. And also the distinction between the rapture and the return of Jesus in glory. So Jesus comes for the church, we're caught up, and then returning back with Christ in his triumphant return in Revelation 19. A 7-year tribulation period. And I'd really encourage you to watch the 7 weeks prophecy video that Dr. Gromacki did, because he talks about how in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27, it talks about this 7-year tribulation period. And actually, that Daniel prophecy even says from the time of the rebuilding of Jerusalem, after it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus allowed them to go back, and then the city began to be rebuilt with moat and all these details. And in the prophecy, it actually gives you how many years from the time of the rebuilding of Jerusalem until the return of the Messiah, the Passion Week, when Jesus entered into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and then the Passion Week when he was killed. That number of years is actually described in the book of Daniel. And so, Jesus in Luke talked about they did not recognize the signs of his coming. They didn't recognize the signs of the times. And so that prophecy in Daniel is super important. Then we have the premillennial second coming of Jesus to the earth. That's the coming in glory right before 1,000 years. And we talked about how in Revelation 20, it says multiple times, I believe 6, that there will be a period of 1,000 years where Satan would be bound, etc. So dispensationalism is a theological system and an approach to reading and studying the Bible. We also call it in LHG. It's a literal, historical, grammatical interpretation. Somebody might not say literal, but they might say, we believe in a historical, grammatical interpretation. Same thing as a literal. And it's a hermeneutic. It's a set of rules that we use for interpreting the Bible and understanding it. And here, of course, you guys know, because this is what we're teaching in this class, we teach the inductive method, which is observation, all the details we have in observation, interpretation that we're talking about right now, such as a literal, historical, grammatical interpretation. Then we have correlation. How does that passage fit within the book, within the section of the book? How does that book fit within the other books of the Bible? And then applications. There are many applications to our lives, but there's only one correct interpretation, and that is the interpretation of the original author to the original intended audience. So Israel, when we say there's a distinction between Israel and the church, like I've heard people are all over the page on this. I've heard relatives of mine say, we are spiritual Israel. I've heard that one. And it is true that we are children of Abraham through faith. But when we say Israel, we mean the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that God gave them specific promises that he would gather them back to the land, and that they would be restored to the truth. However, what we see happening right now is kind of the leading edge. They've been gathered back to the land physically, many of them, but the spiritual conversion has not fully happened. There are some Messianic Jews, but the full conversion of Israel talked about at the end of the book of Romans has not happened. And then the church refers to both saved Jews and Gentiles from the Pentecost all the way to the rapture. Okay, let's talk a little bit about these hermeneutical principles, and then we are going to get to the pictures, I promise. We are going to get to the pictures. So clear revelation. We interpret difficult verses in the Bible with verses that are easier to understand. We begin with verses that are easier to understand, passages that are easier to understand to help explain the more difficult ones. We talked about the agreement principle. We know that the Bible is truth and it doesn't contradict itself. Mostly people misunderstand the Bible. There are not real contradictions in the Bible. For example, I'll give you one. So in the Gospels, it talks about the apostles, and then at one point it calls the apostles after Judas, had hung himself. Unfortunately, when Jesus appeared, it says he appeared to the 11, and then at one point it actually calls them the 12. And so when it calls the apostles the 11 and the 12, those were titles that were used to refer to the groups of the apostles, right? So sometimes they called the apostles the 12, even after one of them had been killed or one of them hasn't been replaced yet. It's still the body of 12, if you know what I mean. So that is not a contradiction. The 12 is the name of the group of apostles. So a lot of times people just don't understand the passage if they're finding contradictions. That doesn't mean that they're real contradictions. So this is very important. We talked about the difference between God's program for Israel and God's program for the church. So God's going to gather them to the land. Eventually, they will be converted. But the program for the church includes Gentiles, and the Gentiles are not Israel. The Gentiles are not Israel. God made covenant promises to Israel. We mean the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Old Testament, which are yet to be fulfilled for Israel in the future. So when he told them that he would give them a land, and we love the Lord and we're children of Abraham by faith, but the Gentiles do not inherit the land of Israel. The Gentiles do not inherit the land of Israel. They can be numbered with them, but they do not inherit that land. The Mosaic Law was given to Israel, the 613 commandments, and we know that Jesus, he fulfilled all of the commandments and requirements of the Old Testament. And the commands in the New Testament are intended for the church. Do you guys know that the New Testament does clarify several commands that were in the Old Testament? Several are clarified. I'll give you an example. So in the Old Testament, there were some sexual sins for which people were put to death, right? In the Old Testament, there were sexual sins for which people could be put to death. However, in the New Testament, people are commanded to repent, and it is a sin. You can be separated from the body of Christ, but there's no death penalty for sexual immorality in the New Testament. Like that was an Old Testament completed in the law. So that's an example. And there are several examples like that. Jesus fulfilled the law. Now in the New Testament, we do have the apostles clarifying commands, and then we have Jesus superseding what was given on Mount Sinai when he gave the Sermon on the Mount. So he clarifies and supersedes the Old Testament. Observation questions are different from interpretations. So observation questions are to find their answers in the book you're studying, but interpretation means you're using Bible study tools. So you guys are going to be digging into doing word studies. So let's talk a little bit about the word studies. We've talked about these kinds of books. We talked about illumination last week. These are wrong approaches to hermeneutics. We know we believe in a literal, historical, grammatical. So allegorical, literal, grammatical, good, allegorical, bad. That's where the words of Scripture are not interpreted in their normal sense, but a symbolic sense. And the early church fathers did a lot of this. Everybody was reinterpreting. I mentioned when they caught over 100 fish at the end of the Gospel of John, some church fathers said, "Oh, that means that there's over 100," and they would equate the fish to other things. The fish were fish, so we don't reinterpret all these different symbols. The Bible explains the Bible, but here the interpreter finds a different meaning in the text, and oftentimes they're saying this is a spiritual, it's a deeper meaning, but actually they're just imposing their own meaning on the text. So we got to be very careful there. Let me scroll down a little bit, please. We talked about that one, demythologizing. We talked about this, Okay, we talked about different fallacies. I thought I had a few slides on word studies. I wanted Paul to see these before we... Okay, now we are going to talk a little bit about word studies because the word trunk can mean the trunk of a tree in English, can mean the thorax of an insect, a big piece of luggage, so men's shorts. So we have to understand the words. So we talk about the Greek word pneuma. This is a transliteration. Pneuma. It can mean wind, John 3:8. It can mean God as a spirit, John 4:24. It can mean the Holy Spirit, the spirit of a man. It can also refer to a demon, breath, and angel. So it depends on the context and the writer. So we have to really look at the context of how the word is being used, and that's why your word study is so important. So the aim of a word study is to understand as precisely as possible what the author was trying to convey by his use of this word in the context. So we talked about the word faith in James chapter 2, that when James was talking about faith, he was talking about head knowledge. He was not talking about conversion faith of the heart, whereas where Paul is talking about faith and being born again, it's talking about we would say, a life-changing faith, a born-again faith. That's not the way the word James used the word faith in James chapter 2. So you find the use of the word by the same writer in the same book. So if you can find multiple uses of that word, do it. Find the use of the word by the same writer in other books. Now, James, we only have his. But if you're going to talk about the use of the word wisdom, find a couple different letters of Paul that he's using it and talk about how it's being used, or a couple examples within the same writer's book. So Luke and Acts are both written by Dr. Luke. That would be a good one. Or the letters of Paul and talk about how they're using the word. And then find the use of the word by other writers outside the Bible during the same time period. So when you get that Silva's Greek dictionary, it'll talk about how that word wisdom is used in the New Testament era. That's very, very important. Rules for word studies. So discover the meaning of a word by studying how the author uses it in a sentence. Determine what the word could mean by looking at a Bible lexicon or dictionary. What a word could mean is called its semantic range. So that's the semantic range. Use a concordance to find all of the verses where the word is found in a Bible. So I think you guys can use software tools as a concordance to find all the examples of wisdom. I have a Strong's concordance. I don't know if you guys have a Strong's concordance. It was one of the first Bible tools that I had as a teenager. And if you don't use the software to find all the uses of the word wisdom in the New Testament and in the book of James, you can use the Strong's Concordance. You guys know what a Strong's Concordance is? Do you need me to show it to you? You know? Okay, it's a great book, by the way. Great book to have. Read the word in each of the verses and find examples of the word's possible meanings. So select a word. We've selected a word for you. So you guys are going to do the word wisdom. So here are some different tools also. So we have BDB. It's called Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew and English Lexicon. Let me see if let me grab some of these tools off the shelf. I'll be right back. So BDB, this Brown Driver Briggs, it's actually, you can get this online. If you do a search for free version of Brown Driver Briggs, you can find this online, and that will help you. So look for a PDF version of Brown Driver Briggs, and you can find that. We talked about the New Testament International Dictionary. That's the 5-volume set that I showed you. TWOT, I showed you that 2-volume Hebrew book there. So these are ones that you can get. All of these you can get at a Christian library, but this one is available on PDF for free. BDAG. So when you use BDAG, this is what it looks like, and it is Walter Bauer. I have the second edition. Walter Bauer, second edition. It is a Greek-English lexicon of the New Testament and other early Christian literature. So if you want this to be one of your sources, you can use this, and you can get this at a Christian library. I use the second edition. If you use the second edition, it's actually connected to other books. So let's just, maybe we can look at an example here for you, since we have a little bit of time. So I think I did this once before, but if you get your I mentioned this one. So if you get your word study, Greek English New Testament Word Study by McReynolds. There you go. And it is the entire New Testament interlinear. And we can go to James. So I'm going to look up James chapter 1 and verse 5, just to give you an example of this. Let's go to James chapter 1 and verse 5. James and Peter. Okay. James chapter 1 and verse 5 is on page 823 of McReynolds. 822. So when I go to verse 5, this is the verse that says, if any of you lacks wisdom. So here it is the word, Sophia is the word for wisdom in Greek. Here it's Sophias, and it gives a word number right above 4678. So you go to the back of the book, every Greek, then it gives you the Strong's number. So right above the word Sophias is, I just said it, chapter 4. Oh, here it is. 4678 is the Strong's number. So now in the back, I can look up the Strong's number, 4678. And it'll show all the uses of that word in the New Testament. 4678 is the Strong's number. Here we go. Yep, Sophia, wisdom. So there it is, page 4678. Kind of showing it right there. And it actually tells us that there are 51, let's see, it shows all the different instances here. I believe it's 51 of them. And then it gives you a BDAG page number, 759. So it gives you all the examples. So I can go to the book of James here, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4 uses. It gives me all the different verses. And then it tells me that it has AG and it says 759. That means if you go to BDAG, page 759, it'll give you a definition. So let's go to 759 in my BDAG volume 2. There we are. Sophia, there it is. And there's like, man, about half a page. Now it's the font is too small for me to show you, but if you go to BDAG, page 759, There's tons of explanations for it. Different definitions. This would be a great source for you to use. So that's how you can use McReynolds and BDAG. And I gave you the page numbers on those. So there's some examples there. By the way, this is a great book. I highly recommend this book. This way you have the Greek interlinear. You can always look up the Greek words and know exactly what word is being used in the New Testament. This is fantastic. You can get online tools like I've shared with you, BibleHub.com/interlinear. But if you want to have the book, that's the book to get. Excellent one. Okay, I think that was good. We talked about all these things. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump further on now, and we're going to start talking about interpretation. I'm going to go up to page 245 here. Okay, devotionals. Okay, commentaries. We've talked about different commentaries. All right, so this kind of leads into our discussion where we're going to be talking about the historical context. So the background. So I really want you guys to start digging into the background of the book of James in particular, and thinking about the time frame that it was written, thinking about what was happening in the church, think about the persecution, chronological context. So use a timeline to find out when events happened in history. So we talked about how James was written in the AD 40s, right? So James is before Paul's missionary journeys. It's before Paul's missionary journeys, a predominantly Hebrew church. Cultural context. Use a Bible dictionary to find the historical background of a custom, person, or place. For example, James mentions the synagogues, right? So we know that the Jews were worshiping in the synagogues, and you can see many of the synagogues in the land of Israel today. For example, in Capernaum, where Jesus did a lot of his ministry, there's still the foundation of that original synagogue that the Roman centurion helped pay for. Then the geographical context. Use a Bible atlas to find out places mentioned in the Bible. So Paul was the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and then Josephus describes him being killed by being thrown off the temple and towards the Kidron Valley. So you can go to the Kidron Valley and you can see James would have been killed in this area right on the east side of Jerusalem. All right, so the timeline. We have the Old Testament chronology, the intertestamental period, and the New Testament chronology. So we're going to talk about the timelines here. So 4004 BC, if you apply a literal, grammatical, historical hermeneutic, that would mean that Genesis is narrative. In Genesis 1 and 2, it's describing what happened. And the timeline that we would use is approximately 4000 BC for Genesis 1 and 2. That would mean that the global flood would be 2348 BC for a global flood. Again, this was not a localized flood, it was a worldwide flood. Lots of evidences for this. 2165 BC would be the birth of Abraham and Ur, Genesis 11:26. 2091 is the call of Abraham, Genesis 12:1-3. And then 2066 BC is the birth of Isaac. 2006 BC, we have Esau and Jacob. 1915 BC, the birth of Joseph, Genesis 30:23. 1859 BC, the death of Jacob in Egypt. And then 1446 BC is the Exodus from Egypt. That means shortly after 1446 BC, when they arrived in Sinai, that's when the law was given. Okay, the law was given to Moses shortly after the 1446 Exodus. Okay, so 1445, Moses gets the law at Mount Sinai. That's in Exodus 20. 1406 to 1400, Joshua leads the Israelites to conquer the Canaanites. It's important to note that when Joshua conquered the land, they were not successful conquering all the land. Now, the people that a little bit more of from Calvinism and from replacement theology, they would say that they conquered the land and they inherited everything. But when you look at the book of Joshua, you can see that they weren't successful conquering it all. Like places like Gaza, they didn't kick them out. You notice that the tribe of Dan did not inherit the land. They ended up going up north. They were not successful. And then you had the people from Gibeah who pretended like they came from far away, and they tricked Joshua, and they were from around the corner. They were never driven out. So you had all kinds of Palestinians, or not, they weren't even Palestinians at that point. You had all kinds of people from the land of Canaan that were still left. So they did not conquer the Canaanites completely. 1385 to 1085 BC, the period of the judges, with Samuel being the last of the judges. And then you have Saul from 1050 to 1010 BC, so for 40 years. And Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. But you remember that the promise of a Messiah was going to be through Judah, not through Benjamin. And as you go into the book of Judges, you find that the tribe of Benjamin had all kinds of problems. They were almost wiped out, a lot of idolatry. And even Saul, when he is first described in the Old Testament, he's like not keeping track of sheep. Like it's not a good picture at all of what's happening when Saul became king. That then led to King David. Then we had Solomon, and then the divided kingdom between the northern tribes and the south. Now remember that in the northern tribes, there were no righteous kings whatsoever, not one. But in the south, there were just a handful of righteous kings. You had Hezekiah, you had Jehoshaphat, and you had Josiah, Hezekiah, and Jehoshaphat. Those were three examples of righteous kings. But all the kings of the north were pretty much wicked. So in the north, Ahab rules Israel. Then Israel falls to Assyria, 722 BC. 701, the angel of the Lord kills 186,000 Assyrian soldiers around Jerusalem. You remember when Hezekiah prayed and went to the temple and let this letter before the Lord. It's described in 2 Kings, also in Isaiah. 605 BC, so there were three different groups that were taken captive out of Jerusalem. The first group is when Daniel was taken in 605 BC, Daniel 1. The second group is 597 BC. King Jehoiachin was taken in captivity, 2 Kings 24:10. And then the third group, that was when Jerusalem was destroyed, and that would have been 586 BC. Those are very important dates. 586 BC is a very important date to remember in the history of Israel. 539 BC is Cyrus has the decree to let the Jews return to rebuild the temple. And you remember that in Isaiah that Cyrus was actually prophesied by name. If you go to Isaiah 44 and 45, now this is important because this was received about 700 BC. So this is received, almost 200 years before Cyrus did it. Cyrus was actually named by God. Here it says in Isaiah 44:28, and by the way, this is in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. It says, it is I who says Cyrus, he is my shepherd, he will perform all my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be rebuilt, and of the temple, your foundations will be laid. And then in the very next verse, in 45 verse 1, and thus the Lord says to Cyrus, his anointed. And the Jewish leaders, when Cyrus became king, they were so excited. They took the scrolls, Josephus says, they brought them to Cyrus and they said, look, God called you by name hundreds of years, over 100 years before you were born. Very, very powerful. So then Zerubbabel leads the Jews to return to Israel. There were three different groups. You had Zerubbabel, you had Zerubbabel, you also had Nehemiah, and then we also had Ezra. That was the third one. 520 BC, the ministry of the prophets Haggai and Zechariah during the reign of Darius. Then you have Esther from the Persian king Xerxes. Excuse me. Persian king Artaxerxes, Ezra 7 to 10. Ezra leads the Jews to return to Israel, and then the prophet Malachi. All right. So this is good. Okay, so we are on slide 257. I'm going to 259, 258. Okay, then finally, Nehemiah leads the Jews in the third return from Persia to Israel, and then the wall of Jerusalem is rebuilt, 444 BC. So there's the Old Testament chronology. We'll do about 10 more minutes, and then we'll take our break. Then we have the intertestamental period, and this is where Marietta, you had asked about, some of these apocryphal books that were being accepted in this intertestamental period. So we have Alexander the Great. And by the way, if you want a good summary of this, I mentioned this must-have book that you really got to get, the New Testament Survey by Robert Gromacki, and he goes over this intertestamental period of history. And if you also want a good source for that's kind of a summarized view, if you go to gotquestions.org and you do word searches on the intertestamental period, it'll give you nice summaries as well. And I've mentioned that's a Calvary grad who does that. So 333 BC, Alexander the Great led Greece to defeat Persia. And it ended up leading into the they call it Hellenization, but that's Greek culture began spreading throughout the ancient Near East because of Alexander. And so that's why, the Greek language, Greek New Testament. So 196 BC, the Dead Sea Scrolls are copied and hidden in jars. Actually, the dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls even precedes this, more like before 200 BC. 167, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, ruler of Syria, he desecrates the altar in Jerusalem. Now, your replacement theology people would say, like when we go to, if you go into your Bibles to Matthew chapter 24, where we talked about the Olivet Discourse. Let's go in our Bibles to Matthew chapter 24, and it talks about the abomination of desecration, the abomination of desolation, So there was an early abomination of desolation, which was when this, Greek leader desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. It was an abomination of desolation. However, when Jesus is talking about this event in Matthew 24, he is talking about an event to happen in the last days, an event to happen in the last days, and we connect it to 1st and 2nd Thessalonians that talks about the Antichrist, like Second Thessalonians, for example, and talks about this event. And so Paul was writing about the Antichrist as well. So this event, abomination of desolation, what the replacement theology people say is, when the Romans came and destroyed Jerusalem, they say that there was a time that one of the Roman leaders went up there, and that's when the abomination of desolation. But when you read the New Testament in its context, Matthew 24 and also 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, the abomination of desolation Jesus is talking about is a last days event, In 167, the Jews, led by Judah Maccabee, defeated the Syrians and cleansed the second temple. 63 BC, Pompey and the Romans. Now we have the Roman era, so we went from the Greeks now to the Romans. Julius Caesar is assassinated. Octavian appoints Herod to be king in Israel. By the way, Herod was not a Jew. He was Idumean. Augustus Caesar rules the empire 30 BC to 14 AD. So when Jesus was born, it was in the days of Augustus Caesar. 19 BC, King Herod begins the renovation of the Second Temple. The birth of Jesus to Virgin Mary in 4 BC. AD 30 is the death and resurrection of Jesus. And then the book of James is written, Dr. Gromacki put here AD 45. So I'd say AD 40s. That is a few years before Paul's first missionary journey. Then we have the Jerusalem Council, Paul's second missionary journey, the third missionary journey, Paul's arrest and imprisonment, and then his first Roman imprisonment, and then the burning of Rome in AD 64. The Roman emperor blames the Christians. So why don't I just do a few more of these dates, and then we'll go ahead and take our break. I think that'll be a good place to do it. So AD 67 is Paul's second Roman imprisonment and martyrdom, right? AD 70 is when the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple by Titus and the Romans. And I think we talked about how when the temple was burned, that a lot of the gold fell into the cracks, and Jesus prophesied every stone would be overturned. So the Romans made the Jewish people, thousands of them, dig up the city, overturn every rock, and to get at the gold. And so the prophecy came true. Yeah, every stone was overturned. AD 73, some Jews at Masada. I've been to Masada. I'd really highly. Anybody here been to the land of Israel? That is a really good. Once this fighting's kind of passed, highly encourage going there. We're trying to organize a group the latter part of next year to go take a group there, and I'll take the group through these different places. Masada is where the Jews made their last stand there, and amazing. So now when people are joining the IDF, they go to Masada, and that's where they take their oath to join the military. I did mine in college in front of the commandant of cadets, but they actually go up to Masada and they do it there, which is really, really cool. AD 81 to 96, Domitian. So Domitian did a lot of persecution of the church. And I talked about the context of the book of Revelation, how it was written during the reign of Domitian, not during Emperor Nero. And one of the things that we know is because the Laodicean church, Laodicea was destroyed in the AD 60s, and it was not a functioning town to have a church there until the time of Domitian. And so that's when Revelation was written. Again, replacement theology would say, oh, like Revelation's already fulfilled, it's already done. The only thing left to happen is Jesus coming back. But we know from a literal historical grammatical perspective that Revelation 4 and beyond is futurist. Okay, I think this is a good place to take a break. So why don't we go ahead and take a break and come back just a little bit after 7 o'clock. We'll call it 7:01. And Paul, I guess you'll be seeing the rest of this via video.
All right. Good night, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Mapes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll see you all about 7:01. Hey, welcome back. I'm so glad that Marietta, you and Susan are close enough to Calvary that actually you're closer to Calvary than I am. If you're in Lee Summit, I'm in Oak Grove. So you two are actually closer to me. But let me tell you, it is such a nice little school, and the librarians are so helpful, and there's just great resources there. Um, it's a good place if you need to just go get away to work on a paper or something. Like they're really, really nice. I am just very proud and grateful to be a part of that school, and just the dedication of everybody is just a real encouragement to me. I'll say that. Okay, so I am gonna have some questions here about. If you guys don't know the answers, it's okay. If you don't know I'm gonna have some questions here about context. So I got some questions coming up in these few slides here. So what happened in the Passion Week? So Palm Sunday was the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Now, do you guys know that the very day that Jesus entered into Palm Sunday was the 10th day of Nisan? And in Exodus chapter 12, um, God had told them, Jesus is the fulfillment of being the Passover lamb. And in Exodus chapter 12, he told them on the 10th day of Nisan, Nisan is the name of the first month of the year. It says, on the 10th day of the month, Exodus chapter 12, verse 3, they are each to take a lamb according to their father's household, a lamb for each household. So you had to choose the lamb. It was to be an unblemished male lamb, and keep it until the 14th day, and then it was to be killed. And so Jesus, he entered Palm Sunday on the 10th day of Nisan and fulfilled that prophecy. When they were all choosing their lambs, Jesus was being chosen. Monday was the cleansing of the temple. Now, I will say this: there is some disagreement as to when Christ was crucified. Right? The primary scholarship would say, the kind of majority of scholarship would say it was Good Friday, right? But there's also some that say that the crucifixion happened on a Thursday, because in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus had said he would be buried 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. And you can't get 3 nights unless he's actually in the grave Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. So, but anyway, Good Friday. And then Saturday is the day of rest. Easter Sunday is actually the Jewish Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Weeks, when the very first, in fact, in Corinthians 15, Jesus is called the first fruits. So, excuse me, not Feast of Weeks. The Feast of First Fruits is on Resurrection Day, Resurrection Sunday. So when they were taken to the temple, the first fruits of the harvest, it's a promise we're trusting God there'll be more harvest. So Jesus is the first fruits. In other words, there's going to be a whole lot more harvest after Jesus. And so praise God for that. This is the Passion Week. And by the way, when you go to Israel, all these places really come alive, like the Mount of Olives, and then the base of the Mount of Olives is where the Garden of Gethsemane is, across the Kidron Valley, the very place where he was imprisoned, of course, the city where he was killed. We have the Garden Tomb, and we'll show you some pictures here. So I'm going to get to the pictures here eventually. So here's the political context, religious context, social context. All of these things are really important when you're understanding the book of James. The political context, right? Who was in charge? The Romans were in charge. The Jewish leaders were trying to cozy up to them in many degrees. You had the religious context. We had the persecution of the Christians that was happening. We had the social context that was going on, the Hellenization of people associated with Greek culture. Okay, here's some of the questions. And I've got the answers on the next slide if you don't know. So if you know, you can take yourself off mute and say, who was the Roman Caesar when Jesus was born? And who was the Roman Caesar when Jesus died on the cross? And why did Paul write in Philippians about the citizenship in heaven? So let's go ahead and take a peek. So Augustus Caesar, Caesar Augustus. That's when Jesus was born in the Luke story. In the days of Caesar Augustus, there was a census. Tiberius was the one when Jesus died. So Tiberius, a different guy. And why did Paul talk so much about our citizenship in heaven when he wrote to the Philippians? You got to remember, Paul is under house arrest in Rome. Paul is a Roman citizen, right? Philippi, where him and Silas were in prison, they sang and the prison shook and all that. Philippi is a Roman colony. So those converts to the church, the converts to Christianity, like Lydia, like the prison guard, like the prison guard's family, they were Romans. And so citizenship for a Roman meant a lot. So Jesus did a pivot and he says, our citizenship isn't primarily to Caesar and Rome. Our citizenship is in heaven. So he was appealing to their Roman roots because they weren't Greeks and they weren't Jews, right? Does that make sense? When he talks about our citizenship in heaven. Why was Daniel offered the third position in government? Bible critics would say, oh, they made a mistake. Why would he be offered? He should have been offered the second position. And why didn't Jonah want to go to Nineveh? Where was Nineveh at? Assyria. They were very brutal. Like the atrocities that the Assyrians did to their enemies was like horrific. I couldn't even describe it. It would be like a very scary movie. What they did to people was horrible. So let's go at 4 and 5. Here's the answers. So Daniel was offered the third position because there was already Nabonidus, the ruler, and Belshazzar. Now in the Bible, it talks about Belshazzar, but it wasn't until they did some archaeology that they found out about this other guy, right? So it took a long time before the Bible was proved. Hey, wait, there was this other guy. The Bible was right. It said Daniel would be the third because there were two other rulers, not just Belshazzar. Why didn't Jonah want to go? Because Nineveh was in Assyria. They were their enemies. Why was Edom at such odds with Judah? You remember who the Edomites were descendants of? You remember? Yeah, I saw Esau. I think you said Esau. Esau and Jacob, a little bit of sibling. Anybody here ever have any sibling rivalry? Any sibling rivalry? A little bit. My older sister, just a little bit of, because she was bigger and stronger than me and I was little. And so she pretty much got the best of me all growing up. And by the time I got big and strong, she was already a beautiful young woman. Like I missed my window. So she always has that over me. But that's okay. I love my sister. But why was Esau, right? And so they were having that back and forth challenge. The Edomites were descendants of Esau, and we know that Esau and Jacob had a lot of rivalry going on. Jacob had to flee to get married. Why did Boaz go to the gate to discuss Ruth? Well, all the elders met at the gate, and so when you go to some of these ancient cities, like in Dan, you can find the gate and this place where the elders, where the leaders would gather. Like this is all 100% true. Okay, we talked about Esau and Jacob. We talked about the gates were the place to do business. Let me skip on down here. So these are just, and when you go to Israel, you see this all like in these ancient places. Why did Moses give this strange command? Don't cook a young goat in its mother's milk. That's why the Jews today don't mix dairy and the meat. So you can't have like a cheeseburger. You can't put dairy on beef. You can't do that. It breaks the rules. Like you can't, like we go to this Italian restaurant. If you ever go to Salvadori's in Independence, order the bistecca modiga. It's this steak medallion, and they put this what is that white cheese? It's not mozzarella. It's provolone. They put provolone cheese and like this white wine sauce. It's wonderful. But in Israel, you can't eat that because you can't put cheese on beef because of this verse. That's how they interpret it. What were some of the gods and idols of Egypt? When God was doing all those plagues, he was putting down all the Egyptian gods. He was showing his superiority to them all. So here's the answers. So in the Canaanite religion, it's fertility, sons and daughters passing through the fire. Anyway, Exodus 23, you can read about that. And then, yeah, the plagues of Egypt were an attack on the Egyptian gods, like the Nile River. They worshipped the Nile River, and he turned it to blood, right? And you remember, if you've seen some of the movies, if you've seen some of the movies with Charlton Heston or the modern ones, some of them show Pharaoh in the river, and then it turns red, and then he gets all red, right? But he still didn't let the Israelites go. You know why? You might say he was in denial, right? Get it? Because he was in denial. Sorry about that. That's not a quiz. That's not a question for a quiz or anything. Okay, why did Boaz's closest relatives, what did they give to him? Why did they give him a sandal? It was a part of their culture. What is winnowing? And how does this relate to Psalm 1? How could John be leaning on Jesus at the Last Supper? Like, if you're in your chair, how are you leaning on somebody? Well, here's the answers. Oops. Oh, I guess I didn't have. So winnowing is when you're separating the wheat in the tares. Boaz's sandal was a sign, it was kind of like it was a part of the whole covenant process when you gave him the shoe that he was going to keep his word. And then John could be leaning on Jesus because in those days they would lay sideways. So he was leaning. And by the way, John was the youngest apostle, probably even a teenager. He could have been about 18 years old, because Jesus died in AD 30. He was there. And 60 years later, he was writing Revelation. So that would make him like 78, 80. So he was very young. He was probably just not even 20 years old. But we'll find out in the kingdom of God. We'll ask him how old he was. Jesus died. Okay, now I told you about those pictures were coming. Okay, the journeys of Abraham. Where did Abram go? What did he do at all these places? The journey of Israel to Canaan. Where did the Israelites go when they left Egypt? The conquering of Canaan. How did Joshua and the Israelites conquer Canaan? So let's go through lots of maps and journeys. So we have here. This would be, here's the Persian Gulf. We got a war going on. Here's Iraq. This is modern day Iraq. Iran is kind of from this line and a little bit over here. This is Iran over here. Now in Iran, Edom. I want to say not the Edomites. I'll look up that verse. It's the, excuse me, I got to look up. There's a passage that refers to this, one of the areas over there, and I just don't want to get it wrong. It's in Jeremiah chapter 50. There's a prophecy about, here it is. Elam. Okay, Elam. Part of modern day Iran, which was right along the Persian Gulf, was called Elam. It doesn't refer to all of Iran, but part of Iran is referred to as Elam, and there's a prophecy in Jeremiah 30. Okay, so here you have modern day, a lot of modern day Iraq. He was here, so Abraham was here. And in between all this is all desert. So when the people were taken captive to Babylon, they didn't go in a straight line, because nobody can. You die of thirst. You have to go north and then down. You have to do a triangle thing, because this is all desert. So when Babylon attacked, for example, Babylon, they had to go north and then they had to come down. So when you're reading in like Jeremiah, Lamentations, it talks about destruction coming from the north. You've heard passages like that in the Bible, destruction coming from the north. Because Assyria and Babylon would always attack from the north. You can't cross a straight line in the desert. Nobody would survive that. So Abram went north to Haran, and then he came down to Shechem and Bethel, Ai, Hebron, Sodom, all those areas like that. Okay. Israel's journey to the promised land. Now, there's two different thoughts. One of the thoughts is that the Israelites left the land of Goshen and that they went down here to, this is the traditional site of Mount Sinai down here. However, there's another group, and I'm in this other camp, that believes the Israelites went through the mountains here. They crossed, not crossing over here, they crossed over here which this is still the Sea of Reeds because it wraps around the thing, and that Mount Sinai is actually over here on the Arabian side, because you might notice that in Galatia chapter 5, the Apostle Paul says Mount Sinai in Arabia. Why would he say that? He must have known something. And by the way, there's lots of evidences of Mount Sinai being over here. So let's talk a little bit more. So here's the Israelites when they went through the land of Canaan. They started out on the east side. Remember, some of the tribes wanted their inheritance on the east side, 2 of the tribes. And then they crossed Jericho, and God parted the sea when the priests put their feet in the River Jordan. They crossed over. They had the Battle of Ai. There was Gibeon, all these different places. And there was a central campaign, then there was a southern campaign. So that was the Israelites beginning to conquer the land of Canaan, but they weren't successful. Where is Bethlehem? What happened in the Old Testament in Bethlehem? So, Bethlehem, why is David from Bethlehem? Does that have anything to do with Ruth? Yeah. Yep. So, Boaz and Ruth, Boaz was from the tribe of Judah, and Boaz was in Bethlehem. And Boaz was let me see, he was the he was the grandfather of Jesse. So I think he's the great grandfather of David. So David, Ruth and Boaz were in Bethlehem. So that's why, you get David being in Bethlehem, because Ruth and Boaz, his ancestors, were in Bethlehem. And then Bethlehem is just about 5 miles south of Jerusalem. So David was a shepherd, right? So in the hills around Bethlehem, that's where they raised the sheep that are then sacrificed in the temple in Jerusalem. Isn't that interesting? Because Jesus is like our shepherd, and yet the sheep were raised in the area where David was. Where is Nazareth? Nazareth is way up in the north, way up in the north. So when we showed this map of Israel, Nazareth is so far north you can't even see it. It's way up here. I think we'll get it. Okay, here we go. So here's Jerusalem down here. If you're going to go from Jerusalem up to the Sea of Galilee, it's about 90 miles. It's about 90 miles. And you have to go along this Jordan River Valley here. This is all mountainous in here. Then you have some valleys in here too, but there's Nazareth. So it was a long journey down to Jerusalem in order to 3 times a year they would go for the festivals. 3 times a year. That's a long hike all the way down to Jerusalem. And Cana, what happened there? The first Cana is where the water was turned to wine, and Cana is in the area of Nazareth. It's nearby. I don't see it on this particular one, but it's not terribly far from Nazareth, Cana, where the first miracle of Jesus turned the water to wine there. Then you have the Sea of Galilee. Many of the apostles were from Bethsaida, and Jesus, Capernaum is where his main base of operations was. The Decapolis, Decapolis, Deca is 10, polis is cities. The 10 cities of the Gentiles were on this side, the east side. And so that's why when Jesus went to the east side of the lake, like there was a herd of pigs, remember when the man's son was demon possessed? And you can go to the hill. I've been to the place, the hill where the herd of pigs ran down, because they were on the Gentile side. The Jews, you wouldn't have the pigs over here, but on the east side, yeah. Then up here, Caesarea Philippi, that's where Mount Hermon is. I believe that's the place of where Jesus was transfigured on the great mountain. It's the only mountain that is covered with snow all the year. The only great mountain in the whole area. It's over 9,000 feet tall. All the other mountains are small, more like hills, maybe a few thousand feet. Mount Hermon is way more than that. It's the only one with snow, and there's still skiing done, and there's snow on there all year round. Okay, let me go down here. We got lots of pictures, lots of archaeology to talk about today. We're talking about our historical and geographical context. So geographical context. Where did Paul go in his first missionary journey? Remember, he went to the area of, starts with the G, Galatia. southern, it's in central southern Turkey, area of Galatia, and then he came back and he wrote the letter of Galatians. Where did he go on his second journey? Well, his ultimate destination was to Europe, to Greece, and he went through Asia to Europe. So Europe and Greece was the ultimate destination. Then on the third missionary journey, he went to both Asia, which is Turkey, and Greece, which is Europe. So let's take a look. Here's the first missionary journey. They started at the missionary church in Antioch, went to Cyprus. By the way, Iran sent a rocket against Cyprus. I don't know if you guys saw that in the news in their attacks. Then they went up into modern-day Turkey, ultimately to this area called Galatia, which included the towns of Iconium and Derbe, Lystra, and he was stoned in the area of Galatia. God raised him, I believe God raised him from the dead. Then they came back to Antioch and he wrote the book of Galatians. So the first missionary journey was ultimately to the land of Galatia. He came back and he wrote Galatians. That would have been about AD 48. AD 48. Okay, now his second missionary journey. Ultimately, he's going to go to Europe, but he went through visiting the churches on the way. And then he had his experience in Troas in the vision where he was told to go to Macedonia. So in the New Testament, when you're reading about Macedonia in Acts, Macedonia is northern Greece and Achaia is southern Greece. So Achaia, and capitalized, it includes Athens, Corinth, and like that. Macedonia is northern Greece, so that includes Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, like that. So on the second missionary journey, so first missionary journey, he went to Galatia, came back, wrote Galatians. Second missionary journey, his ultimate destination was Europe, and he went to Philippi, Thessalonica. They were persecuted. He went down to Achaia, which is southern Greece, and then he wrote 2 letters back to Thessalonica. In about AD 55, he wrote 1st and 2nd Thessalonians while on his second missionary journey, and he wrote it from Corinth, which was like a modern day Las Vegas, like a lot of idolatry, a lot of immorality, and that's why that church had so many problems, right? The people being converted into the Christianity, they were coming from a lot of problems. And the blessing we have is it's a good thing they had a lot of problems because we get a lot of explanations in Corinth about what to do, right? So there's a blessing. Okay, now the third missionary journey, he went to both Asia, which is modern day Turkey, and Europe. And he wrote 1 Corinthians from Ephesus. Then he went to visit them. He went on a visit. He was in northern Greece, and he wrote 2 Corinthians from northern Greece. Then he went down to Corinth, and he wrote Romans about AD 57. So 1 Corinthians about AD 55, 2 Corinthians later in AD 55 probably, and then AD 57 he would have written Romans from Corinth. And Romans is the most complete writing about salvation that we have from beginning to end, and he wrote that from Corinth. So it's real important when you're doing your Bible studies, you're going through, that you understand where Paul was when he wrote these letters, all the problems that were going on, the letter writings back and forth with the saints in Corinth. So there's the third missionary journey. And then, so these are called the journey epistles, because, so Galatians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Romans are called the journey epistles because it was during Paul's 3 journeys that he wrote these. Then he went back to Jerusalem. He was arrested. He was imprisoned in Caesarea Maritima on the coast, Caesarea Maritima, which is different than Caesarea Philippi, that's up in the north, where by Mount Hermon, Matthew 16. But Caesarea Maritima is on the coast, so he was imprisoned there. And then he said, I want to be tried in Rome. So he went on a ship. They were shipwrecked, had a shipwreck in Malta. Remember that towards the latter part of Acts, he ended up in Rome, and he was under house arrest. And while he was under house arrest, he wrote the prison epistles. And I always remember CEPP, Colossians, Ephesians, Philemons, and Philippians. CEPP. He wrote the prison epistles about AD 60 to 62 while under house arrest in Rome, right? So think about it. He's under house arrest in Rome, and he's chained to a Roman guard, right? You remember what he tells you in Philippi? He says, "Hey, all of the Praetorian Guard are getting converted to the gospel." He was chained to these guys, sharing them the gospel. And then so in Ephesians, he's talking about put on the armor of God. Well, he's looking at this, Roman guard that he's been chained to all these years. Hey, put on the helmet of the security of your salvation. Put on the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith. It was also because it talks about those things in Isaiah, but also he was chained to a guard. So, and he was chained to that guard while he's writing about the armor of God. Isn't that interesting? So this is some of the context. Okay, we're going to talk about this Zondervan Atlas of the Bible. It's a good book. I do have this one. That's a good book to get. Another good one to get, the historical and geographical maps of Israel. That's another really good one. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, who's an excellent dispensational writer, and he's done a lot of good. If you want a good Messianic Jewish perspective, a Jew that is a believer, the commentaries by Arnold Fruchtenbaum are excellent. And I did reference the commentary on Isaiah, but he's written many excellent commentaries. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, excellent. And then here's another one, the Bible Charts and Maps Timeline. So they have all the timelines here. Really, really good stuff. So now we're going to talk about archaeology and a little bit more on historical geography. And we got tons of pictures to go out. We'll see how far we can get. There's more pictures coming. All right. So Bible archaeology. So biblical archaeology is the science of excavation, decipherment, critical evaluation of the ancient material related to the Bible. By the way, they have found over 10,000 artifacts that validate all the facts. So many of the details we have in our Bible have been validated by over 10,000 artifacts. They have stones that have the names of Bible characters from David to Pontius Pilate. They found the places where all these things happened. Everything from Nazareth, from Jesus' home village, to places in Israel, to the very gate that he entered when he came, on Palm Sunday. All of these places, so many, and they're still finding stuff. It's amazing. They found, things that like the seal from Isaiah the prophet. They've had ones from things related to Jeremiah as well. And so artifacts, ancient weapons, ancient coins, ancient pottery, awesome stuff. And it has confirmed the historical accuracy of the Bible. Like we talked about the Pontius Pilate inscription, proving that he was there, that he was a real leader at that time. The Dead Sea Scrolls I did my dissertation on prove the accuracy of our Old Testament, that it predates, these prophecies predate Jesus. Archaeology has clarified the world of the Bible. Just amazing, amazing stuff. In the final analysis, it must be remembered that the Bible itself is our finest example of an archaeological document. While we only have a limited number of artifacts from the Bible period, the Bible represents the most complete literary record we possess. This is from The Stones Cry Out. So you know what? Even if they haven't found something yet, like let's say the Bible names a person that they haven't found that, let me tell you what, that person is real and they're going to find something eventually because we have so many facts. There's never been a document so corroborated with archaeological evidences in history as the Bible. Really, there's no excuse, and that's why I believe God has brought all these forward so people can know, hey, I sent you all these evidences. Why wouldn't you investigate it? So we have Old Testament archaeology and New Testament. Now I have to tell you, there are just like in theology, you have a little bit more progressive theologians and you have more traditional theologians. In archaeology, the same thing. There's a group of archaeologists that don't want the Bible to be true. I mean, they do not want it to be true. And they will say things. And then there's a group that's saying, hey, this is validating, right? So you just have to know that you get all flavors. So an Akkadian account of the creation and the flood. So Akkadian has some similar roots to ancient Hebrew. And so it's interesting because they have found thousands of these Akkadian clay tablets, and they found so many Akkadian clay tablets, it has helped us to translate some words in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, where we weren't sure what kind of verb it was. Like there was a couple words they weren't entirely sure, and the Akkadian helped fill in the gaps. So there's been thousands of Akkadian documents found. Very, very important. Talks about the creation and the flood. Atrahasis was discovered in the library of the king of Assyria in Nineveh. So these are literal kings that the Bible describes, and later on in the library of the king of Assyria, they found these things, which would be in modern day Iraq. And it's just amazing. And you know, when you look at Babylon, in fact, I was just reading in, I like doing a lot of readings out of Isaiah because that's where I do a lot of my studies. And it talks about prophecies like in Isaiah 14, there's different condemnations against Babylon. It talks about Babylon being destroyed. It won't be inhabited anymore. And this was hundreds of years before Babylon even destroyed Jerusalem. Over 100 years before Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, Isaiah prophesied this. And it came true. Babylon became this great empire, and then it was just destroyed and left to the desert. It's amazing, all these prophecies that God has given that have all come true. I got a whole bunch of them to talk about. The Sumerian kings list. So in Genesis 5 to 11, we have the Toledot. We have all these generations, and it lists all these different people. Some people say, oh, those lists of people, like, why is that even in the Bible? And people didn't write that way. Then, of course, they find the Sumerian kings list, and it's just like very similar to Genesis 5 and 11, where we have lists of genealogy, like they did the same thing, right? It validates the way that the Bible talked about the genealogy. The Gilgamesh epic, so is talked about here. Gilgamesh talked about in relation to Genesis, you know, a lot of similarities. Was Sargon the Nimrod of Genesis 10? You know, this is interesting. Dr. Gramacki was asking this because Nimrod in Genesis 10 was a great leader. This Sargon was in the similar time period. He's thinking that it could have been the similar person. And then the ziggurat. What did the Tower of Babel look like? Well, so this ziggurat was found. They had to dig out, you know, the way all of this was, you know, still buried here. But notice the way these structures were built, and that they could have been much, much higher. So the idea is that the Tower of Babel could have looked similar to the way this foundation was and then gone higher and higher. Maybe like this ziggurat found at Ur, which is in southeast modern day Iraq. Then the home of Abraham, like they've found the place, the town. They have found Ur, you know, just buried in sand. And now we have these places. So here we have, if you look in kind of the bottom right here, we have Ur, Abraham's hometown. We have Mesopotamia, you know, in this area here. Now, it's important to note that these rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, are not necessarily the same rivers in the Garden of Eden, because the Garden of Eden, you know, was before this stuff, and they could have named these rivers Tigris or Euphrates after the flood, right? And there are some theologians that believe that the Garden of Eden was actually where Jerusalem is. There are some theologians that believe that, because when the temple was built, it has all these Garden of Eden things. So that's a very interesting thought. But Anyway, the Tigris and Euphrates here are not necessarily the same ones from the before the flood, but same names. Tower of Babel in the area of Babylon here. Then if you go north into more north central Iraq, this is where Nineveh is and the capital of the Assyrians. That's way up here. And so Abraham went northeast to Haran, and then he came in a southerly direction to come into the land of Canaan here. You have Haran, this is Syria, modern day Syria. In the Bible, Syria is called Aram. So do you know what language they were speaking in the time of Jesus? You know, you've heard that they spoke Aramaic. So that's where the name Aram, Aramaic. And there is still a village. In fact, I have a friend of mine who's from Damascus. There is still a village where they speak Aramaic in modern day Syria. There's still a village where they speak Aramaic here. Then you have Shechem when he came down here. Abraham, you have Jerusalem. You remember who was king there? Melchizedek. And Abraham paid tithes to him because Melchizedek was above Abraham. So Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, who was the king of Salem. And the Orthodox Jews, and we would believe also that Salem and Jerusalem are the same. Salem, where Melchizedek is. Melchizedek, so Melech is king, Zedek is righteousness. So the name Melchizedek literally means in Hebrew, king of righteousness. And he's kind of a type and shadow of Christ. And that he was the king of Salem, and that a little bit north of the old city is where Abram went to was told to sacrifice Isaac, a little bit north. Then you have Egypt over here. Egypt in Hebrew, it's called Mizraim. Matzar means narrow. So you know the Nile River, like all the people are along that narrow. So Mizraim in Hebrew, Mizraim means narrow. So they're from a narrow land because that's all the people are along the River Nile there, right? Okay, let's go on here. We got Abram's journey. You got the ziggurats in Ur. He, lived in tents. He was a wanderer, went to Egypt. And of course we have, did Abram see the pyramids of Giza when he went down to Egypt? So, interesting question. Genesis 12:14. Oh, here. Did Abraham go? No. So in northern Israel, remember when they captured Lot and they took the family captive? Remember that? And so Abram took like a few hundred men, and they went north. They went all the way from Beersheba to Dan. That's way in the north. And I've been there, and this is the world's oldest arch. The gate. It's the world's oldest arch. It's now packed in with dirt because this whole thing was buried. But you can see this arch, and we call it Abraham's arch because very likely that when he went to Dan, he would have walked into the city through that arch, right? 1800 BC or so. So they call it Abraham's arch. But of course, the more progressive scholars, they say, oh, the Abraham wouldn't have gone through there. Like, they try to discredit it. But we would say, hey, maybe Abraham went through that arch. So we call it Abraham's arch. The progressive archaeologists, they don't like calling it Abraham's arch. That makes them mad. All right, let's look a little bit more. We got Abraham's arch. Beersheba. So Beersheba is in the south of Israel. Let me see if I can show you a map here. So Beersheba is here. You see Beersheba down here. Now this is Israel up here. Beersheba is here, and Dan is like up here. So sometimes in the Bible, they say from Dan to Beersheba. What they're saying is from north to south, because Dan is considered the top, Beersheba is considered the south. So if you ever hear that, hey, from Dan to Beersheba, that's what they're talking about. And down in the south, they found Beersheba. I've been to the ruins. There's a big well. There's a big well there. Remember, Abraham's men were digging a well, and then they came and these guys wanted to take it. Well, that well was massive, and it went really, really deep. And they've been working on it a long time. That's why there was going to be a big fight, right? Because they worked really hard on that well. Well, it's right. Let me see if I can see it here. It's right at the entrance into the town, but I think it's on the other side of this. I have pictures on my phone. But anyway, this is Beersheba. By the way, there's another well they found. There's two competing sites that claim to be Beersheba, just so you know. And then Hebron. So the patriarchs are buried in Hebron. So the tomb of the patriarchs is in Hebron. This is in southern Israel. Let me show you this. So Beersheba, there's Hebron. So Hebron, this site is under a little bit more of Palestinian control. So you have to go through the Palestinian areas to get to, to get to Hebron. But just to know that the tomb of the patriarchs is there in Hebron. So that's what the modern day building looks like. That's around the ancient location. Okay, now we're going to talk about Sinai. So there's the traditional location. Traditional location is down here, and the Catholic Church has a monastery there called St. Catherine's Monastery, and Sinai down here. But more scholars, and me included, are believing that it's actually over here. It's actually over here. And we'll go through some of the evidences on why. I think I included some pictures here. So Jebel Musa is the traditional site. These are all possible sites. But Jabal al-Lawz, if you view the Patterns of Evidence movie, and if you look this one up on YouTube, Mount Sinai, Jabal al-Lawz, you will find some excellent videos about the evidences for Jabal al-Lawz. And I mentioned how it's on the Arabian side, and that the Apostle Paul says in Galatians 5, Mount Sinai in Arabia. Here's some of the evidences at Jabal al-Lawz. You know how Moses, how the rock was split and water gushed out of the rock to all the people? Well, in the middle of at the base of Mount Sinai, you have this raised area, a big rock, and then this level plain, like an empty lake all the way around it where it could have been filled. Here's an artist rendition from the site, Holy Land site, how that could have looked when it happened. And then here's the Jabal al-Lawz, Mount Sinai. And notice that the top of the mountain is all black. It's interesting because it says that God descended like a fire, and that, there was smoke and the people were all afraid. And you go and the top of the mountain is charred black. Very interesting. I could have showed a whole lot more pictures, because when you go to Sinai, like if you were to go this route towards Jabal al-Lawz, there's a big opening. You have to go through this mountain pass. And you remember how the Egyptians had trapped them at the sea? It totally fits here. There's a big flat space where they would have been trapped. And then there's a land bridge right underneath the surface of the water. There, like the elevation of the water, it gets more narrow there. And it's a very gradual sandy bar to cross the other side. And it is so gradual that even somebody in a wheelchair could go. It's so gradual and smooth. It's just amazing. And then on the other side, there was an oasis, just like they described. There's lots of evidences of that. I've been to Jericho also, which is in the Palestinian side. So you have to you actually leave the modern day the lands protected by the nation of Israel, and you go to Jericho, very ancient city. And you know what's interesting about Jericho? It's like a 9-acre site, the ancient city. There's multiple walls that have fallen down over time, but on the northern edge of the town, there's a section of the wall that didn't fall down. And the archaeologists have determined that that was the red light district because of some of the archaeology they found. But why is that important to us? Because Rahab, you remember, Rahab's house was built into the wall, and she would have lived in the red light district, right? I don't think they actually had red lantern. I don't know. But anyway, she would have lived in the wall. And that's the part that wasn't destroyed, that the archaeologists said, hey, the northern part was a red light district. Part of it wasn't destroyed. That actually matches the Bible account. Let's see, we're ancient AI. So they found different sites that could be AI when the Joshua, when they were conquering and they had the battle with AI, they found different sites that could have been it in Joshua 7-8. We'll go about 9 more minutes and then we'll take our last break. Tel Hazor. I mean, they call it a tell because it's a mound. Like people just kept building on top of the old town until it was just a big hill. And so some of these mounds have never been uncovered yet. For example, which one is it in Colossians? I think Colossae. I think that mound has not been dug up yet, but like Ephesus up in Turkey has. So we have Jerusalem, we got Beersheba, we got Dan. I talked about how the Bible says from Dan to Beersheba. It describes the north to the south. Dan to Beersheba. Dan, that's where the idolatry, Dan's tribe was very unfaithful, idolatry. They went to the north. Beersheba is where Abraham was, where the well was. Then he chased those kings that had kidnapped Lot and his family. He chased them all the way up there. Like that's somebody on a mission. That's somebody on a mission. So when you read about him chasing them all the way to Dan and you go to Israel, like, oh my gosh, that is a long, long, long way. It's 90 miles from here to here, and he was just starting down here. So that's over 100 miles that he had to go up there to chase them. And he was like, what, over 70 years old? He was a warrior, determined. This one's important. So a lot of your progressive archaeologists say, hey, they say the kingdom of David never happened. David never happened. He was made up. That's what they say. Until the Tel Dan stele. Up in Dan, up here in Dan, they found this stone with these carvings on it, and it has the inscription House of David. It has the inscription House of David. The black obelisk of Shalmansar, 840, validating more of the Bible. We have Jehu, king of Israel, pays tribute to Shalmaneser. So in that tower, you have Jehu, who's a king of Israel, mentioned in the Bible, paying tribute to a king of Assyria, who's also mentioned, right? So these are validating the historical accounts of the Bible. The Israelites paying tribute, and notice that the Israelites are showing as bearded here. They've also found inscriptions like this in Egypt of bearded Semitic people in Egypt. But you know, the Egyptians, they were all clean shaven, right? But it shows Semitic people there also. So Israelites paying tribute to Assyria. Do a few more of these. Oh, Hezekiah's tunnel. So in Jerusalem, let's see, 322. Back in Jerusalem, you remember when in Isaiah's time that Hezekiah, the city was, surrounded, everybody was afraid. So in order to get ready for the attack, Hezekiah, he built a tunnel from the Gihon Spring on the east side of Jerusalem all the way across town. It's like, oh man, this thing's maybe a quarter mile, something like that. It's about a quarter mile. And he dug it. It's in solid rock. And it's a walkway, solid rock. And they started at one end and then they met perfectly. And then the water flows. and they found Hezekiah's tunnel. So let me show you this picture of Hezekiah's tunnel. I've walked through Hezekiah's tunnel. It has about this much water. It may be about that much water. And you can walk underground underneath the city of Jerusalem in Hezekiah's tunnel. And it's because of the Gihon spring that they found the ancient city of Jerusalem. You know, Jerusalem, it was all, just covered with dirt. They didn't even know where the ancient city of Jerusalem was. I'm talking about the city of David. They knew about the rebuilt city by the Ottoman Empire. They knew where that was. What's that guy's name? Oh, shoot, his name's escaping me. But he rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. But they couldn't find the city of David where David actually reigned. They didn't know where it was. Until in the 1800s, they found the Gihon Spring. Once they found the Gihon Spring, then eventually they found the Hezekiah's Tunnel, and then they dug up David City. So David City has been buried and lost for over 1,000 years. It wasn't until the age of our great grandparents that they even found this stuff, which is just amazing. And also, he didn't show a picture here, but in Jerusalem, they have now, just in the last few months, they opened up the stone road from the Pool of Siloam up towards the Temple Mount. It was just opened up a few months ago. Amazing stuff. So the broad wall of Hezekiah, this broad wall is a very, very ancient wall. Very ancient wall. Hezekiah was like 680 BC. And so we're talking that's 2,700 years ago. That's what the broad wall is here. Second Chronicles. I talked about a seal from the scribe, a seal of Baruch. So you remember when you're reading Jeremiah, he talks about Baruch, his scribe. You remember that when there were some scrolls David had written. Then the king, he didn't like what it said, so he burned them. So they had to write them again. They found the seal of Baruch, scribe of Jeremiah, in the city of David. They found it. Amazing. They've also found a seal from Isaiah. Amazing again. A Babylonian chronicle, the destruction of Nineveh, predicted by Nahum the prophet, 612 BC. Nahum, when you remember Nahum, remember that he prophesied the destruction of Nineveh. So Nahum, Nineveh. Just remember it that way. And they've found these tablets that talk about it. Babylonian Chronicle. The silver scroll amulet. I believe, I'm going to have to do a quick double check here. I believe the silver scroll amulets have Numbers chapter 6. In the silver scroll amulets, it's very, very old. Let me just do a quick check here. Silver scroll amulet. Bible verse. Yeah, it is. It's Numbers chapter 6. It's the priestly blessing. May God bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and grant you peace. These are very, 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 very ancient. They're dated about 600 BC, and they're considered one of the most ancient examples of the Bible. One of the most ancient examples of the Bible. Why is this important that these are dated 600 BC? You know why that's important? Some of your progressive scholars, they say that most of the Bible wasn't written until they were in Babylonian captivity, like 400 BC. They're saying Moses, it never happened that way. They're saying it happened 1,000 years later. But this proves that the Old Testament, there's my alarm telling me to stop. This proves that the Old Testament, that the book of Moses predates the destruction of Jerusalem. That's what that proves. So it's very, very important. Okay, with that, why don't we take a break? Why don't we call it like 8:04? 8:04? We'll get back. I think we're going to finish early. So 8:04, we'll see you back here. Thank you. All right, I am back. I hope that I was sharing the pictures before, right? Okay, good.
Yeah.
I stopped sharing. I'm like, oh, I hope I was sharing and not just talking to myself. Okay, that would have been bad. Okay, good. Let me share again. This time, I brought up pictures that I took in Israel. So I'll share you some of these. Okay, so this is Joppa. Let me see. I'm going to bring up just so it'll help here. A map of Israel in the days of Jesus. I need to expand that. Let's see, where is it? Ah, here we go. Okay, map of Israel at the days of Jesus. Okay, so Joppa, I'll just kind of show it here a little bit. I'll kind of bring it in, show it. So Joppa is kind of along this area here. Joppa is kind of there. It's south of modern day Tel Aviv. Okay, so anyway, there's Joppa. So Joppa is where Jonah, remember? Jonah went down to Joppa. And then also Peter, when Peter went to the tanner, let's see. And then he was called to go to the house of Cornelius. You know, he had the vision of the blanket coming down and the food he wasn't supposed to eat, all that. So this is where the house of Simon the tanner. This is what tradition says is the house of Simon the tanner. There's the house there. Narrow streets. This is kind of a little bit more modern there in Joppa. Okay, now we are at Caesarea Maritima. So Caesarea is, oh, sorry. Okay. Jerusalem's here. We were down here. Now Caesarea is up here. So we've gone past modern day Tel Aviv, and we're now heading north. And this is Caesarea. This is where all the leaders would go. It was like along the sea. It was like a very beautiful place. So like Pilate and all them, they didn't spend their time in Jerusalem. That was like a rocky, dry place. They lived up here. Herod, they lived along the sea. They lived, I don't know. It'd be like going down to, for us, like people go down to Florida for spring break. They were near the water in Caesarea. Well, when Paul was imprisoned, and he was defending himself, like at the end of the book of Acts. Let's go to the end of the book of Acts here. I think this is pretty cool. When you get to the book of Acts, he is defending himself there before the kings. Before he is sent to Rome, he is there. Paul's defense before Agrippa. He's defending himself before Agrippa there. And before Festus. This is all in Caesarea. So here's the place where it happened. Caesarea along the coast. So this area here is where he did his appeal in Acts chapter 25 and Acts chapter 26 when he was defending himself. Excuse me. It was in this very place. This is where people defended themselves. This very circle here that I'm pointing to is the very spot where the people would defend themselves. So when Paul said these words, for example, when Paul was telling him about his experience when he was converted and Jesus appeared to him in Acts 26, and he said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And I said, who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus. Anyway, Paul is defending himself, and he is speaking it from this exact spot. This is where the Bible happened. This is where the book of Acts, this is where the speech happened. He defended himself. He said, get up and stand on your feet, Jesus told me. For this purpose I have appeared to you, to appoint you a minister and a witness not only to the things which you have seen, but also to the things which I will appear to you, rescuing you from the Jewish people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light, from the dominion of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who have been sanctified by me, by faith in me. Then he said, so, King Agrippa, I did not prove disobedient to the heavenly vision. And he kept defending himself. And then at the end of this thing, he said, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you do. It's like King Agrippa was getting convinced, right? You remember that whole thing? This is where it happened. This is again Caesarea Maritima. They would race the horses, you know, through these areas here. This is a aqueduct, so the fresh water was brought in from the highlands along this aqueduct. It's still there. There's the aqueduct. And you know, it's funny, this aqueduct, this is what, 2,000 years ago? And I was in an engineering class in college, and you know what they told us? They said the Romans, they over-engineered because it lasted too long. They said that they over-engineered it. Can you believe that? That's lame. Like, they built it right, and it landed. It lasted till now so we could see it and know that it really happened. I think it's terrible blaming the Romans for over-engineering. This is a tomb from the day, this is not the tomb at the garden, but this proves that this is the way they did tombs. And this is just north of Caesarea, getting closer to Mount Carmel. And notice the round stone that would be rolled into a slot. So this is an example of the tombs from the era of Jesus. Not the same tomb as the garden tomb. We'll show you that a little bit later. Oh, there's me smiling. This is, oh, so you know the Battle of Armageddon. The end times battle, God destroys all the foreign armies. This is the valley, and it would be, let me show you this map again here. So the valley, it extends I might be a little bit wrong here, but it extends like, kind of like this. It extends, or it might be here. It's either here or it's here. But anyway, it extends kind of northwest to east in this region here. The valley of Armageddon. And this is the fort of Megiddo. So Armageddon, R-H-A-R, that's the Hebrew word for mountain, R. And then Megiddo is the name of the fortress. So Megiddo means the fortress of Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo. And this is Megiddo. And R means mountain. So Megiddo, mountain of Megiddo, that's what the valley is named after, Armageddon. That's where the name comes from. Anyway, this is where the end times battle is going to take place. It was one of the fortress cities of King Solomon. He kept a bunch of horses here and everything, and they found all the gates and everything and at Megiddo. So the end times battle is going to happen here. This is the Sea of Galilee. It's not a sea, it's really a lake. You can see all the way around it. It's about 5 miles by, maybe 5 miles by 12 miles, something like that. And you can take these little boat rides. Here's one of, trying to remember this particular mountain. This might be the one on the south end, if I'm thinking of that right. Looking over. Okay, here's the Sea of Galilee. Just take a picture. You have the Mountain of the Beatitudes. You got Cana. This is not set up in a north-south. Actually, north is up here, and north is up here and south is down here. It empties down into the River Jordan. You got Capernaum, Beatitudes, Tiberias, Nazareth over here. Yeah, the map. This boat was found, and it's from the days of Jesus. It's a fishing boat from the days of Jesus. And it was found, well, it was found in my lifetime anyway. It was found in the 1980s. It was found in the 1980s. And what happened was there was a drought, and the level of the Sea of Galilee kept dropping and dropping and dropping. And there was a Jewish guy, and he really liked looking for ancient artifacts. He was walking along the Sea of Galilee. It was very, very low. And out of the mud, he saw a piece of wood, and he saw a Roman nail in the wood. And he got curious, so he started digging. Because of the drought, they found buried in the mud a boat from the days of Jesus. A boat, and this might be the one he fell asleep in. We don't know. And this guy, he did not believe in the God of the Bible before this. Now he believes in the God of the Bible. And I got to meet him. Here, I'll show you a picture of him. There he is. He's talking about how he found this boat. And this is just another evidence that the days of Jesus are real. Jesus was a fisherman. Jesus really was up there. And they really were in a boat like this. So this boat is about maybe not quite 18 feet long, something like that. I'm kind of guessing like that. He's talking about it. This is the hill where we believe the Sermon on the Mount happened. And the acoustics are such that a person's voice could travel quite far there. And it also has a natural area for people to come up by boat. A natural harbor is there, and a natural acoustics. And you can see you can notice how you can see all the way around the Sea of Galilee from one location. Sermon on the Mount. It really was more of a hill. More of a hill. These are pilgrims. You see people from all nations coming to the Holy Land. It's really exciting. From all the different continents coming. These were Ethiopian pilgrims. You know, these Ethiopians, so they've been believers, I mean, in the Bible from the days of Solomon. And then, you know, from Old Testament times, there have been people down there believing in the Bible. Then you had the Ethiopian eunuch who was going to Jerusalem in the days of the apostles. And then Philip went and shared the gospel with the Ethiopian eunuch. And then he went home, and then Ethiopia became converted. And those people are very devout, mostly Eastern Orthodox, I believe. But a whole bunch of Ethiopian pilgrims were there. This is about winnowing. So when you're separating the wheat and the chaff, you go to a place where it can be kind of windy, and you drag a threshing sledge. It's like a board with a bunch of rocks in it, and you drag it around, and it loosely separates. Then you take a rake and you throw up that chaff, and the wind blows it away, and only the grain settles to the ground. The separating, and you know, the reason why I'm telling this story is the house of God, the temple in Jerusalem, was built on a threshing floor, which is a picture of a place of judgment. The separating of the wheat and the tares. Isn't that amazing? The Uruna's threshing floor is where God's house was built in Jerusalem. This is Nazareth village, the very village where Jesus would have farmed, where the people, there's only like maybe 100, less than 200 people, they think, lived in that village, very, very small village. And I hope I have a picture of rats. I didn't show a picture, excuse my French. In Nazareth village, there is a stone, a wine press. It's like a stone-shaped bath, like the size of a bath. And the children and people would go in there and squish the grapes, you know. And they found that in Jesus' village. Why is that important? Because when I was there, I believe I'm going to ask Jesus when I see him someday. Because when he was a child, he probably stepped on grapes in that wine press. And that was the place that I felt the closest to Jesus, because I felt like there's a really good chance he stood in this spot. Other ones, you know, we know he was nearby. Well, we know in the Garden Tomb he was there, but like that place, I really felt like his feet were right there. We'll find out when we talk to him in heaven. This is the Sea of Galilee from the kind of south end. We were at Magdala. This is the cold water rushing from Mount Hermon that ends up in it's very cold water, by the way, because the snow melts, it rushes down, it's very cold. Notice I'm wearing the Chiefs hat, representing Kansas City in Nazareth Village there. This is in Tel Dan, which is right near where I just was. It's in the north of Israel. They talked about high places. They would put their idols on these high places. You know, when Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it? Well, up here at Dan, at Caesarea Philippi, in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus took the disciples here, and the big mountain we're right at the base of the big mountain. We're at the base of the big mountain. So in Matthew 16, he took them here, and the locals and the people believed that this cave was the entrance to Hades, to the underworld. So when Jesus took them here, he said, I will build my church and the gates of hell won't prevail against it. He was letting them know nothing can prevail, right? And then we're at the base of Mount Hermon, is not far away, and that's where, and Matthew 16 was here. Matthew 17 was on the Transfiguration, just a few days later. Then it melts down, goes into the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee feeds the Jordan River, and then they have a place where people can baptize. And a friend of mine, she got baptized here. Her and her husband came with her parents, and she got baptized here. And this is one of our professors at Calvary baptizing her. And he wrote this book, the Zondervan Atlas of the Bible. Not the Zondervan Atlas of the Bible, I'm sorry. Dr. Wayne House co-authored this book, the Zondervan Biblical Archaeology Handbook. Handbook of Biblical Archaeology is co-authored by one of our professors, Randall Price and Wayne House. Excellent book. Excellent book. He also is, I think he's already completed he has several PhDs, but he's one of the top Bible scholars in the world. There is the largest group of evangelical scholars is called ETS, the Evangelical Theology Society. There are thousands of members, and you know, it's all flavors. It's all flavors, very broad evangelical group. But do you know that Dr. House was voted the president of ETS a few years back? Like, probably one of the top evangelical scholars on planet Earth, and he got to lead this archaeology tour, and so I learned from him, and then I'm going to lead the next one. So, Dr. Wayne House. This is the place in the Jordan River where the baptism was. Then we went to Jericho, considered the oldest city in the world. There's the mound. I told you it's like 9 acres. Of course, Damascus claims to be the oldest city too, so you can let them argue about it. I don't know. Damascus says we're the oldest. Jericho says they're the oldest. I took these very pictures. These are the walls of Jericho. And let's see. This is one of the fields, the mountains. Oh, that's the Dead Sea. I think this is a picture of the Dead Sea here. Now we are at, I believe we are at the Dead Sea Scroll village here. And yes, here's the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is one of the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. I took this picture. This is cave number 4, and the village is up here. And then the Romans were coming to destroy Jerusalem, 70 AD, and they were going to wipe out everybody. So this Jewish community at Qumran is the name of the place. They found, now there was no opening like that. They made the openings later, but they found 11 caves and they hid their Bible scrolls in jars in 11 caves. And they lasted over 2,000 years. They lasted over 2,000 years. And I did my dissertation on the Dead Sea Scrolls of Isaiah, which were found in the caves of Qumran. There's another picture of the caves. The village of Qumran is over here. They were separatists. They were separatists. They stayed separate from the people. There's a Hebrew sign there, so you see everything's written in Jewish. This is the National Parks Authority. See here. This is Masada. This is a model of the mountain of Masada. So there's the mountain, and then you see this little ramp here. The Romans made the Jews build a ramp on the side of the mountain, thousands of them, as slaves. They had to build this ramp so the last Jews at the top could be killed. It was very, very sad. And I got some more pictures of it. There's the mountain. Well, okay, I guess I didn't have more pictures of it. Sorry, I jumped around. This is now, oh, this is the valley. This is the valley of Elah where David fought Goliath. This is the valley of Elah, and I got a stone. I got this stone from the valley because I thought, it's a round one and it has a little sharp edge. I thought maybe this is the one David used to kill Goliath. I don't know. It's probably buried somewhere, in the field, right? But who knows, right? Maybe it's that one. There's the Valley of Elah where David killed Goliath. This is in Bethlehem to enter the Church of the Nativity. It's a very short door, so you have to get low to get in. You know why they did that? They say because people who are not reverent would ride their horses in there and stuff. So they did a low thing so people couldn't ride their horses in there anymore. Church of the Nativity to stop animals. Anyway, there's a little note I put so I wouldn't forget. There I am at the Western Wall. There's a person in the IDF. Western Wall. There's the Western Wall here. This is the corner. These are a lot of the stones from the top buildings at the top were knocked down. The ancient city street down here. They've even found, I don't know if you can see these little shops here on the side, on the left side. They have found places where the shopkeepers could store their coins, like in a little slot. Because remember when Jesus was overthrowing the tables and stuff, and people were selling animals and all kinds of things. Now, this is not where that happened, but this is just an example of people selling stuff along the thoroughfare, that stone road that goes all the way down to the pool that's been opened up. I think this is a mikvah. This is a ritual where you dip down to. Oh yeah, this is a mikvah. This is in the old city, just very close to the Temple Mount. They found like 50 mikvahs, so people would dip in, they'd get clean, and then you could go up to the temple. So this is a very ancient mikvah where they could get clean. And right over here, around over here, this is where Solomon's Gate is, the oldest gate to enter Jerusalem here on the east side. They just have been digging around that. Okay, this is, I think I'm on the Mount of Olives. I think this is no, I'm sorry. These are the steps. These are the steps going down. There's the mikvahs. This would be in just north of the city of David. There's a mosque that's been built up there. So the Temple Mount is right in this area here. Oh, and here's a map. This is like a model. So the mikvahs were in this area here. That corner with the little streets was right in here. The Mount of Olives is over here. And then this hill here that I'm kind of circling, this is the city of David that was buried and it was turned into farm fields. It was literally buried and hidden until the 1800s. And the Gihon Spring is over here, and then the Hezekiah's Tunnel goes underground right through here. There's the Mount of Olives. I'm taking it from the city of David and the Gihon Springs. So the Temple Mount is up over there, and we're in the city of David on the east side, and Jesus is going to return to the top of the Mount of Olives right there. That's where he's coming back. And it says when he steps on this mountain, it says the whole mountain is going to split from east to west. And, you know, interestingly, they went they wanted to build a hotel up here in the 1960s. So they did a survey, and they found that there's a fault line running east-west, just like Jesus, when he comes, the whole city mountain's going to split. They found a fault line east-west right underneath that mountain. Like, it's going to happen. I think that's about it. I think that's a good place to stop. I think that's a good place to stop. I mean, you can't do any better than Jesus returning to the Mount of Olives, right? It doesn't get any better than that. So, anyway, you guys are going to do your word studies this week. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. And why don't I go ahead and give us a closing prayer? Give us a closing prayer. Heavenly Father, I just thank you so much for my brothers and sisters in Christ. Lord, I pray that you would just bless Marietta, you would bless Susan, bless the whole class through the rest of the completing of these assignments. Bless their families, give them traveling mercies wherever they go. Lord, we thank you for the reality, the historical accuracy of our Bible, and the reality, Lord, that you did teach the gospel. You sent your prophets. They declared your word, accurately recorded it. And Lord, we have this precious Bible as a witness to your providence, to your power, and to your mercy and to your grace. Thank you so much for your love. We thank you for Calvary University and the blessed opportunity we have to learn of your truths. Please, again, bless them this week. And until we meet again, we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So I'll stop sharing. And have a blessed week, Marietta, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
All right.
Have
God bless
a good
now.
night.
Good night. Bye-bye. And I will hit stop.